No, sir, please. Oh, don't tell me you don't know that these dogs, they have desires just like humans do. All you need to do is make them feel good, and yes, that means sleeping with them too. Fatuma couldn't believe what she was hearing. The words crashed into her like a fist slamming against her chest, sharp and brutal. They twisted her stomach into a tight, painful knot that seemed to squeeze tighter with every passing second. She stared at Khalid, her eyes wide with disbelief, silently begging that she had misunderstood him. Maybe this was some terrible, cruel joke, a test of her patience, or a prank meant to unsettle her. But his face didn't crack. It stayed calm and steady, his lips curling into a small, unsettling smile, as if he'd just given her a simple chore like sweeping the floor or scrubbing the dishes. The casual way he spoke made her head spin, and a cold chill crept up her spine as the reality of his demand sank in. Her mouth turned dry as a desert wind, her tongue sticking uselessly to the roof of her mouth. Her hands, trembling now, reached down and clutched the edges of her dress so hard her knuckles whitened. Her fingers shook uncontrollably, betraying the storm of fear and confusion raging inside her. The air in the room felt thick and heavy, pressing down on her chest like an invisible weight, making it hard to breathe. Above them, a golden light poured from the chandelier, casting a warm, glowing shine across the space. It made everything look so beautiful, far too beautiful for the nightmare unfolding before her. The room itself was spotless and grand, a place of wealth and elegance. Large white tiles gleamed under the sparkling chandelier, reflecting the light in dazzling patterns. A sweet, delicate scent of expensive perfume hung in the air, blending oddly with the faint, musty smell of animals lurking nearby, a strange mix that only deepened her unease. Every detail of the room screamed luxury, yet it couldn't hide the ugliness of what Khalid had just said. 4 big dogs lay on a cushioned bed. They were well fed, with smooth, shiny fur. Their tails flicked lazily. One lifted its head and looked at Fatuma, curious but calm. Another yawned, stretched its long legs, and settled back down. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't understand. But Fatuma did. Her heart pounded in her ears. Her breaths were short and shaky. This isn't real. This can't be real, she thought. But it was. She wanted to run. Her legs begged her to move, but she couldn't. She sat frozen on a wooden stool near the door. Her body was stiff with fear. The room felt too bright, too open, like the walls were glass, and the world was watching. She turned to Khalid. Her voice came out weak through dry lips. "Sir, I can't." His smile didn't fade. "You can, and you will." Her stomach twisted harder. She shook her head, gripping her dress tighter, trying to hold on to reality. "Please, sir. I came here to work as a maid, not for this." His face darkened. The lightness in his voice disappeared. "You think you have a choice?" At that moment, Fatuma realized her life had always been about surviving. She had walked in the hot sun, carrying heavy loads, just to feed her mother and daughter. She had left home believing she was making a sacrifice for a better future. But this was beyond anything she'd ever imagined. The dogs shifted in their bed. One sniffed the air. Fatuma swallowed hard. Her hands were sweaty now. She could beg. She could cry. But she knew it wouldn't change anything. So she did the only thing she could. She nodded slowly, lowering her eyes. "Give me 2 days, sir." Khalid raised an eyebrow. 2 days for what? She forced herself to breathe, steadying her voice. "I just need to prepare myself. It's not easy." He looked at her for a moment, then smiled. "Fine. 2 days. But after that, you do what I say." He turned, walked to the door, opened it easily, and said, "Rest. Think. But don't forget this is not a request." Then he left. Fatuma was a young mother who lived in Tanzania. She had a little daughter named Nima and an old, sick mother. Every morning she woke up before the sun. She stepped outside into the cool air, selling mangoes and anything she could find to feed her family. Her home was simple, made of mud bricks with a thin roof that rattled in the wind. Inside, her mother lay on a thin mattress, coughing softly. Her body was weak from illness. Fatuma would sit beside her, holding her hand, whispering words of comfort. But she knew love alone couldn't buy medicine. Nima was just 6 years old. She'd run to Fatuma, barefoot and full of energy. "Mama, I'm hungry," she'd say, rubbing her small stomach. Fatuma would smile and touch her daughter's cheek. "Wait, my love, I'll make something." Then she'd step outside to the cooking area, where a small fire burned under a blackened pot. Some mornings there was enough food. Other mornings she boiled water, hoping the little flour she had would fill their stomachs. Fatuma worked hard every day. She washed clothes for village women, sold fruit at the market, and did anything to make money. But it was never enough. Medicine was expensive. School fees were high. Some days they barely had food. At night, she'd sit outside, staring at the moon. She'd hear laughter from other houses' families with full bellies, kids who'd go to school without worry. She wanted that life for Nima. Then she heard about jobs in Saudi Arabia. Women from her village had gone before. They sent money home, built new houses, and gave their families better lives. "It's good work," they said. "You clean, you cook, and they pay you well." Fatima thought about it for days. She lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to her mother's soft breathing. Could she leave? Could she leave Nima behind? But what choice did she have? One evening she sat beside her mother and spoke softly. "Mama, I want to go to Saudi Arabia for work." Her mother's tired eyes opened, searching Fatima's face. "It won't be easy," she whispered. Fatuma nodded. "I know, Mama." Her mother sighed, reaching out to hold her hand. Her fingers were thin and frail. "If you must go, my child, go. But promise me one thing. Be very careful." Fatuma swallowed hard, forcing a small smile. "I will, Mama. I promise." That night, after putting Nima to bed, she sat in the quiet darkness, listening to the wind. She had decided. She would go for Nima, for her mother, no matter what waited for her. Fatuma was excited to travel to a new city. She'd never left Tanzania before. She'd never imagined stepping into an airplane or seeing a land so different from her own. Her journey started with a long, bumpy bus ride from her village to the capital city, where she'd catch the plane. She pressed her forehead against the window, watching the dry fields and mud houses disappear. She felt nervous but hopeful. At the airport, everything was bright and new. People rushed around, talking and laughing in languages she didn't understand. She held her small bag tightly, repeating in her mind, "This is for Mama. This is for Nima. This is for our future." The plane ride was amazing. She floated above the clouds, looking out the window, thinking maybe this is what a better life looks like. When she arrived in Saudi Arabia, the air was hot and dry, pressing against her skin like a heavy blanket. The city was full of tall buildings, wide roads, and bright lights that never turned off. She was taken to a small office to meet the family who hired her. The woman looked neat and serious, dressed in fine clothes. She spoke softly but firmly. "You will take care of our home, cook, clean, and help with the children." The man beside her barely spoke. He nodded, his dark eyes scanning Fatuma from head to toe before turning away. At first, everything seemed fine. The house was huge, with golden chandeliers, cold marble floors, and big, shiny windows. The children played and laughed. The kitchen smelled of rich spices. The woman gave her clear instructions. Fatuma sent a message home, "I'm safe. The house is big. The job is good." But soon things changed. The smiles disappeared. The kindness faded. Fatuma's days became endless work from dawn until midnight. She scrubbed floors, washed clothes, cooked meals, and ran after the children. If she sat down for a moment, the woman snapped. "No resting. You're here to work." Her hands hurt from scrubbing. Her back ached from carrying heavy baskets of laundry. She ate only after the family finished, and sometimes there was hardly any food left. Then the real nightmare started. Fatuma noticed the man of the house watching her. At first she ignored it, thinking she was imagining things, but one evening while sweeping the hallway she felt someone behind her. Before she could turn, a hand brushed her back. She froze. He chuckled. "You work hard, don't you?" She forced a nervous smile. "Yes, sir." His fingers stayed on her shoulder. "Maybe you should come to my room later. I can teach you how to relax." She gripped the broom tightly. Her heart raced. "My wife will be looking for me," she whispered. His face hardened. "Then go." From that day, everything got worse. If she greeted him, he ignored her. If she cleaned well, he pointed out a tiny stain and said, "You're so lazy." The children, once friendly, started mocking her. They threw food on the floor and laughed as she picked it up. The woman's voice grew sharp. "Stupid girl. You don't work fast enough. You're useless." Fatuma felt like she was walking on broken glass every day, never knowing what would happen next. One night, she woke to a soft creak. She blinked in the darkness, her heart pounding. A shadow stood at her door. "Who's there?" she whispered. Light from the hallway fell on his face. It was the son of the house, a 32-year-old man. He stepped inside, closing the door. Fatuma sat up fast, her voice shaking. "Why are you here?" He smiled, moving closer. "I just wanted to see you." Her stomach twisted. "Please leave now." He tilted his head. "Why are you so scared? I'm not like my father." Her fingers dug into her blanket. She'd heard whispers before. Other maids talked about men in these houses who thought they owned them. "If you don't leave, I'll scream." He raised his hands. All right, don't worry. I'll go." He left, but she knew he'd be back. Fatuma kept working, pretending everything was fine. She sent money home for her mother's medicine and Nima's school fees. Her mother was happy. "Thank you, my child. You're saving us." Nima laughed on the phone. "Mommy, will you bring me a dress when you come home?" Fatuma forced a smile. "Yes, my love." A beautiful princess dress. She wanted to tell them the truth, that she was treated like a slave, harassed every day, and scared all the time. But she couldn't break their happiness, so she swallowed her pain and kept going. Every night she locked her door, afraid of footsteps in the hallway. She worked in silence, avoiding the man's eyes and the son's lingering stares. Her body was tired, her spirit was breaking. Deep inside, she knew she had to escape or she wouldn't survive. One day, her employer, Khalid, called her into a special room. It wasn't one she cleaned. She hesitated at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. Her heart beat faster. "In," he said, his voice calm. She stepped inside carefully. The room was big, bright, and spotless, but something felt wrong. The air smelled raw and wild, not like cooking or cleaning supplies. She looked around. There were glass cages with birds, shelves with boxes, and a strange wooden crate in the corner. Khalid stood in the middle, hands in his pockets, watching her. "I want to show you something," he said. Fatuma nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." He walked to the cages where colorful pigeons flapped their wings. "I breed birds," he said. "Some of the finest in the city." She nodded again, unsure why he was telling her this. Next, he showed her fish tanks with golden fish swimming lazily. "These are imported. Very expensive." Her fingers tightened on her apron. She didn't understand what this had to do with her job. Then he walked to the wooden crate. He lifted the latch slowly. Fatuma's body tensed. A low growl came from inside. 4 large dogs stepped out. Their coats were shiny and well-groomed. Their eyes were dark and alert. They padded onto the tile floor, sniffing the air. Fatuma took a small step back. Khalid turned to her, smiling. "These are my best." Strong and well-bred, her breath came faster. Something felt wrong. "What does this have to do with my job, sir?" she asked, her voice quiet. He looked at her. "Patience, young lady." Fatuma swallowed. Her hands felt cold despite the warm room. He walked around the dogs, stroking one's head. "You've been good, Fatuma. You work hard. But now it's time for you to do more." She frowned. "More," he nodded. "From today, these dogs are your job." She blinked. I don't understand, sir." He sighed, like he was explaining something simple. "You will feed them, clean them, take care of them." A heavy weight lifted from her chest. That was all. She could do that. She let out a small breath. "Okay, sir." And then he said it. "That's not all. You will sleep with them." Fatuma's stomach twisted. "What?" Khalid tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. "You heard me." She shook her head, stepping back. No, sir, I can't," he chuckled. "Oh, you will, my dear. These animals have needs just like humans. They have desires." Her body stiffened. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. The dog stood there, calm, unaware of what was being said. Her lips trembled. "Sir, please, I came here to work as a maid, not for this." His expression changed. The amusement faded. His voice turned sharp. You think you have a choice? Her heart pounded so hard she thought it would burst. She looked at the door, but he stepped forward, blocking her path. No one leaves my house without my permission, he said. And if you refuse, you'll regret it? Okay, sir, I need time, she said. Please, sir, just give me time. 2 days. That's all I ask. Fine, he said. 2 days. But after that you do what I say. As soon as he left and shut the door, Fatima sat on the floor, feeling lost. Her hands shook. Her mind spun. She was confused. The dogs lay on their soft bed, their tails twitching in sleep. One stretched, letting out a quiet sigh. Another lifted its head, staring at her with lazy eyes before resting again. They didn't know. They didn't understand what had just happened. But she did. Her chest felt tight, like the walls were closing in. She pulled her knees to her chest, resting her forehead on them. What was she going to do? Fatima had no way out. The door was locked. The windows were too high. The house was surrounded by tall gates guarded day and night. Even if she escaped, where would she go? She had come here for a better life, to earn money, send it home for her mother, and give Nima a future. She had imagined working hard but with dignity. Not this. This was dark and twisted her stomach into knots. Tears filled her eyes, but she forced them back. Crying wouldn't save her. Crying wouldn't open the door or take her home. She thought of her mother and Nima. Her throat tightened. She had promised to return with gifts, with happiness, with enough money to end their struggles. But how could she go home now? What would she tell them? Would she even make it out alive? A sharp knock on the door made her jump. She held her breath, frozen, but no one entered. The knock was a reminder. 2 days. She had just 2 days to decide her fate. Time slipped away fast. Each second brought her closer to something she couldn't bear. She had no passport, no money, and no way past the locked gates. Then an idea hit her. She faked being sick. She pressed her hand to her stomach and bent over, pretending to be in pain. When Khalid called her that evening, she clutched her belly and whispered, "Sir, I'm not well. I have my period. It's very painful." "How long?" he asked. 2 weeks, she said quickly. 2 weeks. Impossible. It won't take that long. Sir, sometimes it does. I feel very weak. He didn't look convinced, but after a moment he waved his hand. Fine. Get well soon. But don't think this will change anything. She lowered her head. Thank you, sir. That night she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. This was only a delay, not an escape. She needed more. Over the next few days she paid close attention to everything. She watched the guards, noting when they changed shifts. She listened to the noises in the house. Most importantly, she built trust. She acted obedient. She smiled when needed. She worked without complaining. Slowly, they stopped watching her so closely. One evening, while washing dishes, she turned to Layla, the lady of the house. "Mom, the kitchen supplies are getting low," she said softly. Layla barely looked at her. "Tell Khalid." The next morning, when Khalid came into the kitchen, Fatima lowered her eyes. "Sir, the food supplies are almost gone. I can go buy more." He raised an eyebrow. "You? Why not the driver?" She wiped her hands on her apron. "I know what we need, sir. I can go quickly and return." He looked at her for a long moment, like he was trying to read her mind. Then he pulled money from his pocket. "Fine. Don't take long." Her fingers trembled as she took the money, bowing her head. "Thank you, sir." She turned and walked to the door. Her feet felt heavy, each step full of fear, but she kept going out the door, through the yard, past the gate. Then she ran. Her heart pounded. She gripped her dress, her breath sharp and fast. She didn't dare look back. Finally, she saw a small building with men in uniforms, the authorities. She stumbled inside, gasping, her hands shaking as she grabbed the counter. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Help me." As soon as she said, "Please help me," Fatima fell to the ground. Her body was weak. Her legs couldn't hold her anymore. Everything blurred, the voices, the footsteps, the bright lights. Then there was nothing. When she woke up, she was on a small bench in an office. A fan spun slowly above her. The smell of old papers filled the air. A man in uniform stood nearby, watching her. A woman officer knelt beside her, holding a glass of water. "Drink," the woman said softly. Fatuma's hands shook as she took the glass. The water was cool on her dry throat. "What happened to you?" the officer asked. Fatuma opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. The memories crashed into her, too heavy, too painful. Then, in a broken voice, she spoke. She told them everything: the beatings, the insults, the hunger, the way they treated her like she was nothing. She told them about Khalid, the dogs, and what he demanded. Her voice cracked. Her hands clutched her dress. But she didn't stop. "I don't want the money anymore," she pleaded. "I don't want to work here. I just want to go home." The room was silent when she finished. The officers looked at each other. The woman squeezed Fatuma's hand gently. "You're safe now," she said. For the first time in months, Fatuma believed it. It took just a few days to arrange everything. The authorities bought her a plane ticket, gave her back her passport, and handed her some money minus 2 million Tanzanian shillings. It wasn't much, but to Fatuma it felt like a miracle. When she boarded the plane, tears streamed down her face. This time they weren't from fear. She was going home. The journey felt long. She stared out the window, watching the clouds, her heart restless. Would her mother be okay? Did Nima still remember her? Then the plane landed. The air in Tanzania was warm, carrying the smell of earth and cooking fires. Fatuma stepped out, her legs weak, her heart pounding. She walked through the small airport, scanning the crowd, her breath caught. Then she saw them, her mother standing with a cane, her eyes full of tears, and Nima running with her little arms stretched wide. "Mama." Fatuma dropped her bag and fell to her knees, opening her arms. Nima crashed into her. Fatuma held her daughter tightly, kissing her hair, breathing in the scent of home. Her mother knelt beside her, touching her face gently, like she was making sure Fatuma was real. "You came back," she whispered. Fatuma nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I came back, Mama." She looked at them, the people she'd fought for, the reason she'd survived. She was home. She was alive. Eve. Fatuma's story isn't just hers. It belongs to thousands of women around the world, young girls who leave home with dreams of helping their families, only to get trapped in suffering. Many never return. Many are never heard from again. We must listen to their stories. We must speak for those who can't. We must protect the women and girls still suffering in silence. If you know someone thinking about working abroad, tell them the truth. If you hear about abuse, report it. If you have a voice, use it. Fatuma survived, but many others won't. Let's not forget them. Thank you for reading. Please share the story with your family and friends. I'd love to see you again in my next story. Goodbye.